Guys, so I know this is a new place I'm recording. This is actually my office, and I wanted to record in here because I just wanted to change it up a little bit. And also, as you heard at the beginning, I'm re-recording this after I got home from work because I really wanted to include the intro, and I really want to thank the person who wrote it. I'm going to still have to ask if he wants me to actually tell who he is or not, but yeah, that was absolutely amazing. They totally surprised me with it today. So today's Table Talk Thursday is, should we teach slavery in history? And of course my opinion is going to be yes, because I don't believe in whitewashing. But the way you present slavery, you have to be careful about, because if you teach it like in the idea of taking it as a modern concept and thinking about it as a modern topic, then of course you're going to have people who are going to say you shouldn't teach it because then you're causing white guilt, which I don't really believe in. I don't believe in it for several reasons, and one is my ancestors from Ireland were pretty much indentured servants from when England took over until they had to flee Ireland in 1901. So my family wasn't even in America during the time of slavery, and we were treated as slaves back in Ireland and even when we came over to the U.S. for a very long period of time. And I mean, it's crazy to me to have people say, oh, you shouldn't teach slavery, because then you're missing a whole part of what history actually is. Now, to give you some background, of course, during the Constitutional Convention, there's talk about ending slavery, and it's something that John Adams feels very strongly about. Well, the guy who's writing the new Constitution and the guy who's writing the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, comes out and says, slavery is like a wolf. You have it by the toe, but you're terrified to release it because you're afraid it's going to bite you. And that's pretty much what happened, because our nation is founded on the compromise of the original 13 colonies, the original 13 states. 3 of them refused to ratify anything if it ended slavery. So instead, we came up with a compromise that we'd end international slave trade in 1807. And if you teach it as a concept of, if you think about yourself as a person during this time, do you find it okay to own slaves? Back then, it was something normal. Back then, it was thought of a temporary status where you would have these people who are slaves who were brought over from Africa to the United States as slaves because they wanted to make them Christian. They wanted to give them something of a better life. And as a temporary condition, the rule used to be, once you were baptized, you were no longer a slave. And because of this, I feel like you have to teach that part of the history, and it's later on where we see the whole concept change from once you're baptized, you're a slave, to it's no longer viable for us to say once you're baptized, you're free, because of the economic changes. Now, once America breaks free, they still have slavery going on. And the last state to actually end the international slave trade is Georgia in 1813. But the United Kingdom will end slavery altogether in 1838. Now, they end it. There's a great movie on this called Amazing Grace. I cannot find my copy of this movie, but it's worth the watch. And when I teach slavery, that's how I present it. I present it as, you have to think of yourself during that time period. Why did people own slaves? Think about the conditions, the mindset of these people, because it's totally different from how we think about it today. And yeah, there is slavery still going on today. If you want to know where, it's mostly in the Middle East. So for us not to teach slavery is going to continue to allow slavery to exist in other parts of the world. And when we talk about slavery itself, you have to realize that after an African American was freed from slavery, they stayed in the country, they were able to own land, they were able to own slaves of their own, and they were also able to earn their own living, even though they weren't actually equal to whites. They were treated pretty badly. Now, when it comes to the concept of slavery, I will fully admit there are horrible acts in slavery. If none of you guys have ever seen the TV series Roots, I highly suggest watching it, because it shows a true portrayal of slavery. Because I also feel, on the flip side of the coin, you shouldn't teach slavery as something that's always good, like a lot of times I've seen in textbooks where they don't really talk about the abuses. And that bothers me because it gives a false narrative. And when I teach, I show a clip from Roots where Kunta Kinte is being whipped because he tried to run away, and the guy keeps asking him, "What's your name? What's your name? What's your name?" And he continues to whoop Kunta Kinte until he actually says his name is Toby, which is the part where I like to talk about the dehumanization, where they are ripped not only away from their culture, but they're ripped away from their names. And that's an interesting part that a lot of people kind of miss on slavery, is they almost dehumanized them to the point where they could not use their own names, they could not use their own culture, but their culture still survived. You have Creole languages, you have Cajun, you have blues, you have jazz, you have foods that we eat like fried chicken and fried okra. This all comes from the concept of slavery, and not to teach it, I think, is a horrible thought process. I mean, it's something so important that I feel like every child should learn. Now, what age should you start teaching slavery at? I don't think elementary schoolers can handle it. About 6th grade, I think you should introduce the concept of slavery. 7th grade, a lot of kids take civics, so you kind of can talk about it there as well. But in 8th grade, I really think you should teach what slavery is, what impact it had on American history, because that's your American history class. And you have to recognize that our nation was not only founded by our founding fathers, but those men and women who were in chains. And to leave them out, I feel, is a slap in their face. And once you get through the 8th grade, I think once again when you take American history in high school, you should spend some time talking about this because of the Civil War. You're going to have to pose a question. Was the Civil War, which was fought from April 12th, 1861 to May 9th, 1865, was it fought over states' rights, slavery, or federal rights? Those are the 3 issues you have, or is it a combination of the 3? And if a child doesn't know what slavery is properly, then you can't have that discussion. And I feel that's absolutely unacceptable. Now, when it comes to slavery, some references I like to use are books like this. This is The Fall of the House of Dixie, The Civil War, and the Social Revolution That Transformed the South by Bruce Levy. Now, this book is a very interesting insight on the mindset of the Southerners when they talk about, like, how hard it is for them to sell slave families apart because it breaks their heart as well as the slaves, and it gives them mental anguish as well. And it's all from the Southerners' point of view, which is a very interesting take on the Civil War and slavery itself. Interestingly enough, the South called slavery its peculiar institution. The second thing I like to use is a documentary series. It's called The Civil War by Ken Burns. Now, in the very first one of these, there's a man who is a slave. It's a recording of him talking, and he says, I never want to go back to being a slave because when you're a slave, you're treated like a dog. And that's very powerful for students to hear, because in the past, I've had students make the comment to me that slavery wasn't as bad as I'm trying to make it out to be, and I'm like, no, it was horrible. It was a horrible, abhorrent practice that we actually had to compromise to create our nation, because without that compromise, the United States wouldn't exist. Now, when you get on the topic of slavery, I know a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions. And do I believe that anybody should feel guilty over it? No, because you're not responsible for your ancestors' sins. Because I'm not responsible for anybody who came before me, what they did. I am my own person. And to feel like you have to be responsible for your family's sins, that's ridiculous. Now, if you continue that mindset of your family, then yes, you are guilty of that, because you are pushing that concept forward into the next generation. Do I feel that it's a necessary topic to talk about? 100%. Now, next week's Table Talk Thursday, I'm going to talk about the injustices to the African American community during Jim Crow era, and I'm going to talk about the connection between the NRA, the African American communities, and the Republican Party. So stay tuned for that. Bye, guys.